a caller on the line. I believe it's Dean Burke. Dean, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing all right. What's your question this week, bud?
My question is, how bad do the Bengals have to start for Marvin Lewis to lose his job mid-season, or he can get mid-season fired?
That's a great question, and I think there's a lot of caveats to it. We're gonna take your question off the air, Dean. Thanks for tuning in live, buddy. All right, so did you get that question? Did you hear it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where to start, so I guess John, let's put you on the spot, buddy.
So the question was, how bad do the Bengals have to start for Lewis to get fired? Is that the question?
Fired, hot seat, any of that stuff.
Okay, so I'll answer that question with another question. Can you win negative games? Because that's the only way I could see Marvin Lewis getting fired before these next 2 years are up. And I wish I could expand a little bit more, but that's all I got. Negative games.
Yeah.
One.
And Scott, I know. I mean, Scott, trust me, Lewis has come as close as you possibly can. Ties and losses and all kinds of stuff. So, but my thing, the Bengals had a very year was the golden opportunity if they wanted to move on from Marvin Lewis, because the first game of the season was awful. They looked completely unprepared again in an opener under Marvin Lewis, and then aside from the last two games after that, steal was unacceptable in itself, given the lead the team had and how they played in that first half of that game. The following two games against Chicago are absolutely unacceptable. And then, as Mike Brown noted, those last two games kind of saved Marvin's job. And
dead cat bounce.
So I don't know what it's going to take, Scott. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the negative game comment by John is probably accurate. He signed a 2-year extension after this year. If this year isn't going to get him gone, even a Browns or lines like 0-16, I don't think would do it unless you get something like an 0-16 plus. So 0-16 plus, maybe Marvin gets arrested for, I don't know, selling pot at the airport or something. Plus, something. I mean, it would take several, really awful things combined. Well, record probably wouldn't even matter. I mean, 0-16 plus, 0-15-1 because he's going to get a tie. It wouldn't be 0-16. But yeah, it would take something like that to basically have them end it before. And I think even after the 2-year run, if they missed the playoffs both years, don't be surprised if he gets another extension.
Yeah. Oh God.
I wish you weren't right.
Yeah. I know. Seriously. Well, thanks for the question there, Dean. We've got a couple of text messages we'll get to here in a second. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get in touch with us in a number of different ways and download the program on basically a lot of different apps now and stuff. So Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, all our stuff's on Cincy Jungle. So check us out. We're going to get to these last two questions and then get out of here. This is from Justin Tabor. And this might be a tiny bit more up Scott and I's alley, given our age. But, John, if you have some thoughts, I'd love to hear it as well. Scott, who deserves the Hall of Fame more, Ken Anderson or Ken Riley? The battle of the Kens.
Oh, that is a good question. I mean, I think both of them and Willie Anderson all deserve it. But if I have to pick one of the Kens, I think I don't know how you pick one. I mean, Riley is he's up in like the top 5, I think, in interceptions in NFL history. And back in an era when they weren't throwing a ton. And then you have Anderson, who, led him to a Super Bowl, was one of the first passers to really be a very prolific, kind of like that West Coast style, guy, accurate, getting lots of. If I had to go with one, I guess I'd go with Anderson only because he is the quarterback. The criteria that get you in the Hall of Fame. kind of like the Troy Aikman thing. He was never a great quarterback, but he was a quarterback of great teams. Anderson was a quarterback on a Super Bowl team, and he did put up some great numbers, in a era when passing wasn't as prolific, and his numbers tend to get overshadowed now. And I think it's going to be harder for him because it's, you look at, receiving yards back then, 900 yards is pretty awesome. Nowadays, you need 14 or 1,500 to be considered pretty awesome. So it's going to be harder for him, but I think he had, as the quarterback position and some of the changes that they implemented with Paul Brown and with Anderson, the innovation, the way the game kind of changed under them, I think I'd have to go with Anderson.
Anderson, okay. Justin, also who texted us, is now stating his case in the live YouTube chat. And it is Tabor, like labor, he says. He said Ken Riley, and because Ken Riley has 60 interceptions and the four guys in front of him all are in the Hall of Fame. Good case to be had there. I do have a take, but John, you were kind of nodding a little bit about some of the things Scott was saying there. Your take between the two Kens.
Scott's right. It's tough. Obviously, I wasn't alive to see either of them play. But I will say this. Eli Manning is going to get into the Hall of Fame one day because he won 2 Super Bowl rings. And he's going to get into the Hall of Fame because it's not the Hall of Efficiency. It's the Hall of Fame. And everyone knows Eli Manning's name. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't kind of understand when they talk about the voting process. And that's why, guys like some Steelers, like, what's his name? Lynn Swan's in the Hall of Fame just because he won like 4 Super Bowls. Like, people knew that Steelers team. I don't think a lot of people nowadays know who Ken Riley is. And that's kind of why you just never hear his name up in the senior candidate conversations. But people at least know who Ken Anderson is at this point because he's always in that conversation. And he's always talked about one of those first, like, he like set a precedent in the passing game when, teams weren't just passing the ball that well. And he had like a 70% completion percentage back in the 70s, which is just unheard of. So I think based off all those kinds of factors, Anderson's probably the more deserving, even though you could definitely make the argument that Riley's career, when you talk about production and era specific, is considerably more impressive, I guess. And if Anderson obviously wins a Super Bowl, he's in, and we don't have this conversation. But I think it's probably Anderson at this point.
Yeah, and interesting point about Eli Manning. If you look at Eli Manning's record, if you look at him year by year, and you look at the Giants year by year, essentially he's had of his, I think, 14 years in the league, he's had a small handful of great years, and then he's had a lot of blah to subpar years. And it's those Super Bowl runs, those deeper playoff runs, the small handful of times that they've done that. That's where he's kind of made his case. And obviously when they had in those years, they had Michael Strahan, they had Tiki Barber, they had, the three-headed monster, Brandon Jacobs, Tiki Barber, and Derek Ward, I think, was the other guy. He had a lot of surrounding talent. Now, of course, quarterbacks, when you win the Super Bowl, you have a lot of surrounding talent. That's just a different conversation altogether. But interesting point about Eli Manning there. I'm going to say this. I am going to be fence rider and say I think both are probably have the credentials to be in the Hall of Fame or should be in the Hall of Fame. But my takeaway from this is that this is the reason why the Bengals need their own Hall of Fame or their own Ring of Honor, because these guys are getting overlooked. These guys are getting, even if they're fringe by some voter standards or what have you, or Hall of Very Good, this is the reason why the Bengals need to have some sort of honoring system, official thing. A guy like yourself or myself, I never really saw Ken Riley play either. But if I was to go to a Bengals game and go to Paul Brown Stadium and there's a wing where they talk about Ken Riley, they have his uniform and they're honoring him and all that kind of stuff, I think that'd be a pretty cool thing. And even if he never makes it into Canton, even if Ken Anderson never makes it into Canton, it's just the right thing to do. And at least these guys are being honored in a way that they should be by their team. So that's kind of my main takeaway from this discussion. We're running way long on time. I apologize to you guys. I apologize to the listeners, but we had a lot on tap. Let's get to this final question. It's from Austin Tran. John, if the right tackle continues to struggle for the rest of the season, do you think we could possibly draft an offensive tackle in 2019? Well, I mean, obviously, but I think it's also, I think that's a question more about first round offensive tackle, especially after 2015 and what has happened with Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher, or might they do something in free agency? But I would think if the right tackle position continues to be a mess, I would think that they would draft someone high. They did it with Andre Smith in 2009, right?
Yeah, and those tackles that have come through, they've all been first and second round picks. So, and this team, besides Billy Price, they've always usually stuck to their trends in terms of drafting. But that right tackle position is going to be very interesting because all three of those guys are free agents, and honestly, it wouldn't do the team any good to bring any of them back. But maybe one might be back. But if it struggles like we expect it to, yeah, it's probably the favorite right now. And now you have a new offensive line coach who is going to scout those offensive tackles just like Paul Alexander did. He's going to bring his own, criteria that he looks for. Hopefully we see some better results that are not either Jake Fisher or Cedric Ogbuehi.
Yeah. Scott, even with the struggles at right tackle, and if they continue through 2018 here, do you see that the Bengals might even have a bigger need than offensive tackle, namely a right tackle early in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what happens in, free agency, injuries, or whatever, the contract extensions, if Dunlap and Atkins aren't here. Right tackle, it was a huge need this year. And I think most Bengals fans were quite frustrated. You see every single pick. And, okay, second round, okay, nope, it's Jesse Bates. Third round, nope, it's Sam Hubbard, and he gets Blake. At some point, it's Mark Walton, whatever. Okay, well, at some point, we're going to get – and they just never, until that, second to last pick with that Rod Taylor. They just never. Yeah. And it's where, and you had a lot of guys who were falling to you. It's not like, man, there's like 4 good ones and they're all gone and it's nothing we can do. Every round, this was considered a very deep tackle draft. You had a lot of guys, these, Connor Williams, some people have different opinions on Orlando Brown, but, there are a lot of other guys like that who kept falling, and they passed on them. They fell. More guys fell. And at the end of the draft, they just took none. They're kind of like, well, we're happy with what we have here. And we've seen from the first 2 games that if you're happy with what you have there, that's not very encouraging because you don't have very much there. And I'm not quite sure if it was just, hey, we got a new offensive line coach. Let's see if he can, make something out of nothing. And it looks like he needs something to make something out of it, if that makes any sense. I would be very amazed if they did not address that either in a trade, a free agent signing, or the most probable would be a draft pick.
Yeah, I agree. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to get out of here. Thank you for the listener questions to those of you who called, texted, and left your comments and whatnot in the live YouTube chat. Much appreciated. Again, you can get this program on a number of different platforms. I hate to sound like a broken record, but Stitcher and Google Play are the latest additions, along with iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. And so check it out. Get the show how you can.